Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We got some amazing panels. Emily Jashinsky, Maximilian Alvarez, Michael Sarah Hopkins, Philip Wegman. We've got David Sirota here. We've got Oren Cass on as well. But Saagar, we wanted to start with Biden gave his big infrastructure speech, unveiled his plan. We both have some significant criticisms of the size and scope and thinking behind that plan. But then the former president responded, and we have to talk about that as well.
There are so many tensions and stuff going on here. I'm glad we're covering this. Put this up there on the screen. Trump put out a full statement, basically blasting it. He called the Biden infrastructure bill as a, quote, giveaway to China. But I think the reason why that this is really important is because this statement kind of reveals the incoherence, really, of the Trump administration's policy whenever it came to this. It says, Joe Biden's radical plan to implement the largest tax hike is a massive giveaway to China and many other countries that will send thousands of factories, millions of jobs, and trillions of dollars to these competitive nations. This is actually basically anti-China manufacturing rhetoric with trickle-down economics. Because what it says is that if you raise taxes on corporations, that they will move their businesses over to China. I mean, that is true if you allow them to do so, or if you don't put manufacturing incentives here specifically, which is actually part of what's inside the Biden plan, something I would dramatically support, even more so if they were going to do so. They only have $300 billion to domestic manufacturing. I would put that number up even more dramatically. But again, here's what it comes down to, which is that Trump has to both try and talk about infrastructure and try and talk about domestic manufacturing while defending his corporate tax cut of 2017. Yes. And that's frankly just irreconcilable, man.
Things do not fit together.
It just doesn't work. It's like, in terms of, he always talks about low taxes and all that. And Mitch McConnell, this is very much Mitch McConnell brain, like, we can't tax the most productive parts of our economy. And look, once again, we're talking here about a corporate tax, raising it back to raising it to 28%, which, is entirely reasonable. Even at 21%, there's a lot of discussions, even whether corporate tax matters, because actually tax breaks are really where a lot of this stuff comes into play. But I think the biggest problem that he has is he just doesn't really know. Beyond the rhetoric, on a policy level, this is where things all just completely fall apart.
Yeah.
Because what you're basically advocating for is like a 0% corporate tax in order to make sure that we can compete here domestically. Like, that's just not how that works, period. And we've seen that over and over again. The only real way is to make sure that you have competition and then domestic investment and encouraging practices, which, let's be honest, the Trump bill was a huge failure. It led to hundreds of billions of dollars in stock buybacks and not the domestic manufacturing investments that they promised that it would.
No.
AKA, corporations cannot be trusted to spend the money that we are going to give them in order to try and boost our investment. So we have to put some strictures on that. Sorry.
And more corporations than ever before paid 0% in taxes. Not only did the jobs not come back, jobs continued to flow overseas. So his plan was a disaster. And let's be clear about what Joe Biden is proposing here. It is really very little. He's proposing, currently it's 21. He wants to go back to the 28 that it was back in 2017. Before that, it was 35. He had this whole song and dance in his speech that I actually found really annoying, where he's like, we all agreed 35 was way too high. When, like you said, this whole thing is a shell game, because ultimately it's
almost
the
no one
loophole.
pays 35%.
Nobody, exactly. That's exactly right. It's all these gigantic loopholes that allow big corporations to be able to write off all kinds of stuff, and through depreciation, real estate developers did very well during Trump's plan, so that they pay very little ultimately in taxes, much less as a percent than what ordinary wage earners ultimately pay. So on the substance, he's just wrong. But you're right. The most interesting part about this is him trying to fit the round peg into the square hole, where trying to say worker and globalist. He's got this line here. This tax hike is a classic globalist betrayal by Joe Biden and his friend. The lobbyists win. The special interests win. China win. The Washington politicians and government bureaucrats will win, but hardworking American families will lose. Joe Biden's cruel and heartless attack on the American dream must never be allowed to become federal law. Again, a reminder. This outrage about how the lobbyists are winning, et cetera, is about increasing taxes on the wealthy.
Of $400,000, households over $400,000.
And in fact, the lobbyists and the Chamber of Commerce and all the business interests are freaking out.
Because they don't like the taxes.
Even these moderate tax hikes, they're completely mobilizing against.
That's right.
So it's just absolute reverse of what he's saying here. But you're right. It exposes like this mangled, nonsensical dog's breakfast of a statement is exactly what Trump's administration ended up being.
Yeah, this is a perfect emblem for what happened with his administration on an actual policy level. And it also shows where the rhetoric just really starts, when you really look at it and you peel it back, there's just not a lot going on there. And worse, it shows that you can see how this is evolving. And this has always been what I think the biggest problem, and where I think the GOP is headed now, is they're just going to use, like I saw Mark Short, who is Pence's former chief of staff, he's created this organization called Protecting American Workers to lobby against these tax hikes on like very rich Americans. Like, okay, like you're basically doing the bidding of the Chamber of Commerce and advocating against an infrastructure plan specifically under the guise of like protecting workers. That's insane and it's ridiculous. It also could work because of the way that our cultural politics stand today, but it just goes to show you like the fundamental tension between what MAGA is supposed to be and then like how it actually ends up in practice.
Well, and let's be clear, I have my gripes. They're not just gripes. I have significant problems with this infrastructure package because I think it's woefully insufficient, but it's also extremely popular. It's extremely popular. And I'm sure, look, this thing has a long way to go before it actually makes it through. And I think it has a lot of hurdles to overcome, frankly, before it actually makes it through. But if Biden is able to get infrastructure done and Trump, who
was not
famously at Infrastructure Week over and over and over again and couldn't even get that done, that's a major embarrassment for him, and I'm sure he feels it that way.
I just checked. So the Trump administration policy that they put forward was actually $1.5 trillion for the private sector. Only about $200 billion of that actually came from federal funding because McConnell and them freaked out. And then they still didn't actually pass it, just to be clear. I could do a whole other thing about what went wrong on that and how it actually completely exposed the problems here. But this statement, in a nutshell, is basically why Trump was not able to succeed in the legacy that he wanted to leave, and why the GOP really has no map in order to follow because there's no policy legacy in order to build on.
Yeah, you could imagine an alternate universe where President Trump actually meant some of the things he said on the campaign trail, where this was his opening bid in his presidency.
Yeah.
You do that, and you set a totally different that's just a totally different universe. He would still be president right now if he had come out of the gates.
And he would have loved it. They go the Trump highway system,
100%.
Trump bridge,
Trump
that's what
train. I thought he was going to go to every district, open the purse string, hand out money, really visible ways, with his name on it, branded, all that stuff. But Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, from the beginning, they had an actual ideology. He just had some slogans that were convenient for him to get elected.
They played him like a fiddle.
All right, more Rising for you after this.